The second virtue of remembering Allah that I bring to your attention is that Shaykh al-Islam ibn al-Qayyim, he mentions this is the best way to preserve and protect ourselves from our eternal enemy, the shaitan. To remember Allah is the best way to protect ourselves from the shaitan. And this is something which the Prophet ﷺ, he teaches us, and something which the prophets before him spoke about also. With the example the Prophet ﷺ gives is that imagine if you are escaping and you are running from your enemy and he's close behind you, and you find a fortress, a secure fortress, and you enter into it and you lock the doors behind you and there's no way between you and that enemy now. You have finally found some refuge and some safety. The Prophet ﷺ, he gives this example and he says, كَذَلِكَ الْأَبْدِ لَا يُحْرِزُ نَفْسَهُ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ إِلَّا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. This is the example of the servant, that he cannot truly protect himself from the shaitan and from the devil and from his whisperings and from his negative thoughts except by Allah's remembrance. Shaykh al-Islam ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah goes on to explain that if there was no other virtue to remembering Allah except that through his remembrance we are protected from the shaitan, then this will be sufficient for us to be remembering Allah throughout the day and throughout the night. Because it's the only true way that we find protection from the devil. And subhanAllah, we find that when we are away from Allah, the only thing lying there for us is the shaitan with his many forms of misguidance. However, when we run from Allah, the shaitan disappears and he vanishes because we know he is a coward. And when we remember Allah, that is a name and that is a remembrance and an act of worship that the shaitan cannot tolerate to see. So this is how it protects us from the shaitan. The third virtue which helps us understand the importance of Allah's remembrance that Shaykh al-Islam ibn al-Qayyim mentions is that we find true peace and true solace and true happiness in our lives through Allah's remembrance. And it's the best way to remove any negative thoughts, any anxiety, any depression from our souls, our minds, and our hearts. As Allah tells us in the Quran, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُم بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. Those that believe and they remember Allah, they are the ones that are going to find this itmi'nan, this peace, this tranquility, this solace within their hearts. Because surely in the remembrance of Allah do the hearts find peace and rest. So anytime that we are feeling overwhelmed, or we are going through some difficulty, or we feel like our mental well-being is not where it needs to be, then one of the ways that we are to help ourselves is by remembering Allah frequently, and by remembering His greatness and His favors upon us, and being grateful for the blessings that He has given us, and not focusing too much and overthinking about the negative thoughts. Shaykh al-Islam ibn al-Qayyim, he mentions that the heart, it becomes clouded and deceived and troubled and anxious with two things, with sins and with heedlessness of Allah's worship. And it is cleansed and clarity is brought to it with two things, by Allah's remembrance and by seeking Allah's forgiveness. بِذِكْرُ الْإِسْتِغْفَارِ, remembering Allah frequently and remembering our shortcomings and our mistakes and seeking Allah's pardon for them frequently. These are those two things which bring about this clarity and cleanse our heart and our souls. So anytime that we are feeling overwhelmed, this is a practical step that we are supposed to do. We are supposed to remember Allah frequently and also make istighfar and seek forgiveness for our shortcomings and our mistakes. The last virtue that I share with you, my brothers and sisters, about the importance of dhikr and the many virtues that it has, is that, subhanAllah, when we remember Allah, it helps us worship Him with a level of perfection, with a level of meaningful worship. Not just as an empty slogan or just as an habitual worship with no real meaning, where you find culturally people have the prayer beads and within a minute they make istighfar 100 times, or they say subhanallah 100 times, but they're not pondering and reflecting over what they're actually doing, that they are remembering the Lord of everything in existence. And when they do this, He is remembering them in return. This is something which they are not aware of. May Allah guide us all and enable us to worship Him to the best of our abilities. Also, when we understand and comprehend the virtues of these sayings and these phrases that we say, and how beloved they truly are to Allah, and how much rewards He has placed therein, as well as understanding their meaning and how that affects our psychology and our iman and our souls as Muslims, what these words actually mean and the heavy meanings and lessons and wisdoms that they contain. Once we combine all of this and we perform dhikr regularly, you will see the amazing impact it has upon your iman and how it draws you closer to Allah. May Allah bless us all with worshipping Him correctly. This is why the Prophet ﷺ, he said, مثل الذين يذكر الله والذين لا يذكر الله كمثل الميت والحي. The example of the one that remembers Allah and the one that does not remember Allah, it's like the example of the living and the dead. There's no comparison. And subhanAllah, that's how sometimes we become so heedless. That's the state of our iman. It's like we are living, but at the same time, our hearts have become so hard that we are walking around spiritually dead. And our iman is next to non-existent. May Allah forgive us and protect us all. This is why Shaykh al-Islam ibn al-Qayyim, and I finish with this quote, he says, أشد عقوبة في الدنيا أن يمسك الله لسانك عن ذكري. One of the greatest punishments Allah is going to afflict us with in this dunya is that He stops us from remembering Him. That we become so heedless and we choose heedlessness over our iman and His worship. He gives that to us. And we become heedless to the extent that we do not remember Him anymore. And we do not make His dhikr and His praise and His thanks. And we do not glorify Him. That is the greatest punishment, or one of the greatest punishments in this dunya. Shaykh al-Islam ibn al-Qayyim, he also goes on to say, one of the reasons why we are constantly ordered and reminded to remember Allah is because of its great importance and the need that our souls need of Allah's remembrance. And any time we turn away from Allah's remembrance, then this is something which is going to be to our detriment and not to our benefit. وَكَانَ خُسْرَانُهُ فِيهَا أَعْظَمُ مِمَّا رَبِحَ فِي غَفْلَتِهِ عَنِ اللَّهِ. Subhanallah. And that which we lose in being heedless of Allah and not remembering Him is always going to be greater. It's going to be a greater loss than any possible benefit we're going to attain in that which we give precedence over Allah in. The loss in not remembering Allah is always going to be greater. May Allah forgive us for our shortcomings. May Allah enable us to worship Him to the best of our abilities. Allahumma a'inna ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. O Allah, aid us to remember You frequently. O Allah, aid us to give You praise and thanks. And O Allah, aid us to worship You to the best of our abilities. And surely Allah knows best.